And we are live. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, David.
How
Thanks
are
for
you?
having me.
Well, my pleasure. It's really a pleasure to have you here today. I'm super happy to have crossed paths on LinkedIn, to have
Yeah.
chatted with you, and to have a full conversation and an episode of Beyond the Thesis be born of this meeting you. So this is a live recording. We're now live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. On Twitter, people can find us too, but there's no interaction there. I can see or follow comments. For people who are on LinkedIn or YouTube, if you
hmm
comment, or Facebook, I will see the comments here. By the way, you can tell us right now if the sound is okay, if the video is okay. It looks good on my side, but having confirmation from the audience is always a positive, although not necessary. Melissa, I'm gonna just fix one thing
Yeah.
and ask you one thing that I should have asked before we went live, which is how is it Gismondi? Because I know there's different pronunciations of that family name.
It is Melissa Gismondi.
Oh, there. See,
See?
if I hadn't asked, I would have defaulted to Gismondi. So there you go.
No
And I
problem.
capitalized your name. There you go. Gismondi, perfect. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now that everything is going fine is I'm going to pause a little bit, give an intro, give a short bio
hmm
of who is Melissa Gismondi,
hmm
and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Welcome to this new episode of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. This week I have the great pleasure of having with me Melissa Jean Gismondi. Melissa is an award winning writer and radio and podcast producer whose work has appeared in major media outlets, including the New York Times, The Walrus, The Globe and Mail, Literary Review, and on the CBC radio programs Ideas, Tapestry, The Current, and Writers and Company. In 2019, the Writers' Trust of Canada named her one of the 5 rising stars, and she was the 2020 to 2021 New Media and Public Humanities Fellow at the Jackman Humanities Institute at the University of Toronto. Melissa holds a PhD in American History from the University of Virginia. Melissa, again, it's a great pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
It's really exciting to me too. You have been these past few years working on great content on the podcast side of things. It's a
hmm
medium that was born some time ago, but evolving day by day, and I'm really excited to have someone here who comes from within the medium. It's not a frequent
hmm
occurrence. But apart from that, I'm also super happy that you're here because your path, your path from academia to this modern and I would say cutting edge industry in the media domain is not a traditional one. And of course, the title of this episode and this conversation is The Power of Graduate Internships. And
hmm
I'm eager for you to talk about that. But first, I always ask guests to add one or two things to kind of give a wider picture of who they are. So, can you tell people who are watching, people who are listening, one or two other things that define who is Melissa Gismondi?
Wow. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. It's such a simple but good question.
Isn't it?
Um, I am also I'm a very creative person, and that is a lot of what I do job wise. I'm a runner, and that helped a lot during graduate school to go for long runs, sometimes with people, sometimes alone. Um, those things also really sort of helped keep me sane, continue to as well. And I think the creative component is something I underappreciated during graduate school that I've sort of spent the last couple years reconnecting to. Um, so yeah, I think those are two sort of different components of me
Mhm.
that don't fit neatly into the little bio box.
That's interesting. I really find it interesting what you say because it really kind of completes the picture. Because in a sense, what I'm hearing is there's a part of you where ideas are a part of you, or of the time during your day where ideas are born. There's a part of your day and of your life where you're producing things based on those ideas, and I'm kind of
Mhm.
summarizing very
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, yeah,
And there's a part
yeah.
of the day when you're kind of in this meditative, I would say it like that, space which is running alone or accompanied, but where your mind is elsewhere, and you kind of recharge to then come back to the creation. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And when I'm running, if I'm alone, sometimes I'll listen to podcasts, sometimes not. And I very frequently am taking notes. Like sometimes things will just I'll start writing a piece in my head and I'll just stop to sort of write it down. Or that I think is, a lot of people talk about if you're doing sort of any sort of creative task, and writing a dissertation is a creative task. You have to
Hmm.
create, you're shifting from, I remember I had a professor say the tough thing about graduate school is you're shifting from being a consumer of scholarship to being a producer of it. And if you're in that production role, you need that space to just let your mind wander. And people talk about the power of boredom for
Hmm.
creativity, which is in such short supply these days. So, almost scheduling, like, all right, this is, 45 minutes where I will not have anything. I'm just going to be, it's kind of weird sometimes. Like, we're not used to it anymore,
No,
but a lot of interesting things come from that place.
it's true. We're not used to the silence anymore. There's always something buzzing in your pocket. Sound coming from anywhere in the spaces you're in, be they professional, commercial, or whatever. And yeah, there is value in that. It's funny because boredom, there's kind of a negative connotation, at least in my
Yeah.
view, to the word. And maybe silence is another way to say it, or understimulation. I don't know. We're
Yeah.
overstimulated, and it's kind of putting your hand on the knob and just kind of going down, 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 and to let something bubble up from your mind, or else it just won't.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, definitely.
Now, you mentioned that running was a part of your graduate school life and was important, if not key, to that part of your
Yeah.
life. Can you develop a little bit more on that? I'd really like to know
Yeah.
what you mean by that.
Yeah, so it's funny, just like time-wise, I actually started running as I entered my PhD program. So I was living in Montreal doing my master's. Fortunately, I started running in April of the year in Montreal. So by the time I moved, I was living in California, so I didn't have to try and run through Montreal winter.
Oh my, yes.
Yeah. Um, It was when I was living in places that were, I mean, I moved to outside Sacramento, California. When I was living in places I didn't really know anyone that were very different from me. When I was dealing with the stress of graduate school, getting away from screens, getting away from the dissertation. I had a small running group when I was transferred and was in Charlottesville, Virginia, with some graduate students. So many different components of it, whether it was like the physical stimulation of just moving my body, because so much of what you do in graduate school is passive, right?
That's
I
true.
mean, it's passive, but it's very demanding intellectually. But you're just sitting there reading or writing, moving my body, being outside in nature. It was huge. I mean, it was just purely coincidence, but I'm very grateful that I took up running at that time, because I think about just what an impact physically, emotionally, like in so many ways, it helped me.
Hmm.
Um, so, I think it doesn't have to be running for someone, but something that gets you away from that world for a little bit.
Yeah. And would you say that, because you mentioned running with people, that there was also having a community aspect to it?
Yeah, so when I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, I was a transfer student, so I didn't really, I was sort of entering. I left my cohort in California, and I was entering not really this community or cohort sort of already existing. Um, and I joined a couple other history graduate students. They were training for a marathon. I
Oh
didn't,
wow.
or half marathon, but I thought I'll just, I'll run with them. And we ran every Saturday morning together. And we were all history students, but we talked about, one of them was studying like, Spanish Catholicism and, New Spain and very different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, sometimes we talked about history and we talked about, helped each other get through whatever was going on in graduate school. And then it was nice to have a place to be and people
Mm-hmm.
who are waiting for you, which isn't always the case in those early days of graduate school when you're
No,
alone a lot.
no, it's true. And I guess also, I imagine there's a certain there's a positive to having this community of people who are not in grad school with you, who are, yes, in the same domain. You can discuss things, but they're not your lab mates or whatever, because
Yeah,
it's a different universe. So there's not so much interference with actual, I
yeah,
don't know, day to day of your research.
for sure.
Uh, it's very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Now, so I think we do have a better picture of who Melissa is.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we also start to get a picture of this arriving in Montreal, and how you kind of you took this new activity that actually brought kind of uh, a healthy how can I say, breath of air into your graduate school day to day.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned when I presented you all this work that you've done in writing and podcast production with in outlets that are really really well known. I mentioned New York Times. I mentioned different programs on CBC. But when you
Mhm.
start a PhD, it's not usually the type of career that you envision. What was your vision for yourself? Let's say your 5-year vision or your post PhD vision when you started.
I mean, I did a PhD because I thought I wanted to be a history professor. Um, and I had phenomenal American history professors at McGill who, and they're sort of legendary. Like when you talk to other people, I'll meet other people who would say, "Oh yeah, I took one of his classes." It's the kind of classes where your face lights up. Um, and so I thought, that's what I want to do. Like I want to do that. And I knew I had to, if I wanted to be competitive in terms of getting a job in American history, I would probably have to go to the US. So that's what I did. Um, and I think I sort of, this is maybe a little bit cynical, but I sometimes call it sort of like playing the game of,
Mm,
doing the conference in the humanities, doing the conference rotations, doing the peer review, all of that. I was doing it for a couple years. And then I think I slowly started to realize that the way I could maybe try to get it to work out for me was not sort of what I wanted for my life. I would be up, some of my friends in my graduate program, they were applying to, 50, 80 jobs, and
oh wow.
they wanted to be a professor so badly that they were totally okay moving to places where they didn't know anyone and, all of that. And I started to, I'd been away from where I grew up outside Toronto for a long time. And I started to think, I don't think I want it that badly. Um, I didn't know what else to do, but I started to know if it works out in a way that I like, great. But
Mhm,
I didn't see it happening. And I think another thing too is I didn't love being a specialist. Like there are things that I'm interested in, but I'm very interested in a lot of things. And I think that's
mhm,
what pulled me towards something like journalism and nonfiction writing, where there are specialists. And, if you in like news, there are reporters who have certain beats, but otherwise, I've done stuff on bioethics and, politics and literature. That doesn't really work in the academic world, right?
Of course, of course. This is it's interesting, and so it seems to me that you didn't have around you people to model. I mean, when you started thinking, okay, I'm not going to fight or go for a professorship and go all the distance to get that. I don't want to have these compromises of needing to move, etc., which is a question for a lot of us who go through the PhD at
Yeah.
that point. uh, and I have the feeling that you didn't feel that you had tools or information on what else you could do, which is also a frequent issue. Graduate students are formed with one objective, professorship, and then they
Mhm.
hit this 10, 15, 20% wall, depending on the domains. It can vary, of people who actually can access tenure track professorship, and then the other 80% often end up having to just improvise and scramble at the end in the
Yeah.
last year to figure out, okay, what career can I land after these 5 years of very specialized training.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't. So I guess this is where the internship comes in. When I transferred to the University of Virginia, um, I I guess I'd been there maybe a year, and there was an internship that came up at Backstory, which ran for, I think it was about 12 years. It started out as
Oh,
a
wow.
public radio show, produced, and they sort of distributed it to different public radio stations across the US, and it was produced out of Charlottesville. And then as I was an intern, they actually shifted to be podcast only. They've
Oh, wow.
since wrapped up production, but they had an internship for a researcher for the show to sort of help, you know, give the hosts research blurbs, because they were all historians, but they were obviously, again, they were experts in their field. So
Mm,
the show was about doing the history behind the headlines. So they could, if
okay.
it was in their field, they could do it no problem. But sometimes they needed some research to just, as we all do, especially with, you don't always remember the specific dates and percentages and all of that. So I applied because I thought, well, I love radio and,
Hmm.
why not? I remember asking my advisor if I thought it would work to my advantage or disadvantage in terms of
Hmm.
getting an academic job. I remember him saying it can't hurt. And
Okay.
if I can recall correctly, I don't think anyone else really applied. Like most people were not that interested in it, because I think it was this narrative of, you do the work that will get you a tenure track job. And this
Hmm.
was not considered part of it. But for me, it opened me up to a world of, you know, freelance journalism writing, podcast production, audio production,
Mm,
all of those things. And it still took me a while to sort of see myself as someone who could do that. I definitely had imposter syndrome for a long time. And I
mhm,
thought, well, I'm the historian research assistant here. But it at least I've started to familiarize myself with that world. Um,
mm.
and I think that was pretty significant for me. I didn't see it at the time, as often happens, but looking back, it was significant.
Yeah, and how was your day today? So you have to add this activity to your agenda. How did you organize? How did you negotiate uh, those first moments of, okay, now I part of my week is spent in
Hmm.
this other place, but I still need to be working on my research, because that's something people often ask, or it's often the objection that they have is I can't do something else. I have to put all my eggs in this PhD basket,
Yeah.
and they wonder how can they add something else to their day to day.
I mean, one thing that really helped me was the fact that I was no longer, I was on a fellowship, so I did not have to teach anymore, be a
Okay.
teaching assistant. Um, so that understandably, for I think a lot of other students, probably they felt like I can't take this on in addition to being a teaching assistant on my other work that I have to do. So that freed up some time. Um, and I think, you know, it gave me, I talked about places to go. I would go into the office where they made the show, and I would do, you know, I think it was like 10 hours a week at first. But I think it also, the pace of it quickly, A, I liked the pace of it, and B, it sort of adjusted me out of that academic pace, which can be quite slow.
Hmm.
At this show, they produced a show once a week. So there was always new topics, always new research. When I was there, they were organizing a specific appearance on another NPR show. So then there was, which was a daily show. So then there was a brief period of a lot of research needed. It was short, you know, time span. And it just readjusted me to different paces of work. And that I think also was really helpful, because I can imagine for others that is a tough adjustment to make
Hmm.
if you're used to having months and months and months to do something, and then you enter a
Exactly.
different industry
Yeah. Yeah.
where, you know, it's daily or weekly or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, definitely the pace at which time passes is something that's often referred to by people in industry, or vice versa. People changing from one side to the other of the fence is how times flows at different speeds.
Yeah.
And also that how projects need to be closed at different speeds too. Um, Now, a question still about this new space. You mentioned imposter syndrome just before. Did you have some mentorship? How was the onboarding into this new team that you were now starting to contribute to?
The senior producer he was really great. And he helped me. They'd had a research assistant before, I believe, or they were sort of, um, so he helped me. In a way, it was like I was sort of already primed for it, because, you know, you have to sort of basically write little research blurbs on a subject. It was, you know, it was about American history, so I could already sort of know the basics of it. Um, I think that in terms of mentors, I met soon, I can't recall her official title, but there was a woman named Diana Williams who worked there, who she was would work on their digital strategy for the show. But I remember really sort of saying to me, why don't you start writing things like
Mhm.
op-eds, you know, connecting. This was also, I think, when people were starting to really connect what was going on in the show, was connecting what was going on in the news to history, providing historical context. And it was sort of like, oh, me, you know? And she said, you know, helped me publish my first op-ed, suggested I write it, suggest I pitch it to a newspaper.
Mhm.
Um, and those are, I think, the little, like, the people you meet along the way. And, you know, I've been fortunate enough to have several of them who help you see something in yourself that maybe you can't yet. Um,
Mhm.
or you're not in that space, or you're, you know, I was still probably thinking I'm just a failed historian, like something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, which a lot of people at the end of the PhD, when they end up outside academia, they have this is a feeling that's shared by a lot of people. This feeling of failure, of failing out, and it's totally not true. Especially if 80% of people, it's the path that they end up following. It can't be failing out. It's just the natural way of things.
Yeah.
There's a selection for those small number of tenure track positions, and then the rest of us, you know, the socioeconomic structure will absorb us and will need our skills in another way.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. Now,
Hmm.
there's one thing I didn't ask you, or a
Hmm.
detail that I wanted. You said that you saw this job posting. How did that come up? Where were you looking for job postings? Where, because often
Hmm.
people also wonder, where can I find these opportunities that are not exactly,
Hmm.
canonical, let's say.
Hmm. Um, if I remember correctly, it was sent through. So because it was all within the show was produced by Virginia Humanities, which is the state sort of humanities agency, and it had
Okay.
connections to the University of Virginia, where I was a student. I believe it came through sort of our history department graduate listserv. A friend had passed it to me and said, "You should apply. You love radio." And I would,
Mhm.
have the radio on and listen to it all the time. Um, so think in that case, it was fairly easy. But one thing, I would really say to people is I think there are so many opportunities in like this university structure and the system, and there are so many things. And once you're not a student, you can't take advantage of them usually.
Exactly. Mhm.
So while you're a student and you qualify, you can apply, you know, I think like what's the harm? Worst
Mhm.
case scenario, you don't like it and you think this isn't for me, and then that. But
I agree.
so I think sometimes it probably requires a bit of legwork, but I think at most sort of large research universities that would have types of PhD programs probably have some sort of internship that might be of interest to you.
Mhm. Mhm. So do explore those resources while you're in graduate school, and it applies for all the other stuff. Like I often mention mental health services. If you need
Yeah.
that, if you're in grad school, take advantage of it while you're there. All of these things, when you leave, then you're not eligible anymore. So for sure, no, I totally agree.
Yeah,
You're
I
gonna
remember it
go
was
ahead.
really I went to a mindfulness you mentioned mindfulness at the beginning. I went to a mindfulness meditation group for graduate students, and I remember when I graduated, I stayed to do 1 semester as an adjunct, and I remember going to the leader and saying, "Please, can I still come?" And she said, just because I thought, I those great things there are great things that are available for students.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So and usually also the add-on that I add to that, because it was my experience and it was your experience too. When
Mhm.
you're from abroad, you might be overwhelmed by being in this new country or new city, and you might go into tunnel vision and not see these things, and try be to be well mindful of all the things that are available. Go to the student services. Even though you're a graduate student, there'll be someone there who'll be able to share some info with you and to point you towards whichever resources are. And I think often if you're a foreign student, you
Mhm.
might just miss out because you're dealing with all this other stuff in your
All the
life.
other yeah. And
Now
I
you
think
Yeah, go
often a
ahead.
lot of oh, sorry, I was just gonna say I think they often have career counselors too available for graduate students. So I think
Yeah.
I didn't do that, but I wish I had.
Yeah, and that's it now. Hindsight is
Mhm.
2020,
Yeah.
right? But that's why we're here. That's why
Yes.
Beyond the Thesis is here, is because we went
Yes.
through these things, and we now can look back and say, here's how I would have done it if I knew all that I know now.
Yeah.
And hopefully people listening, people watching, if you are in grad school, you can not do the same mistakes that we did.
Yes. Yes.
Now, you mentioned this person who kind of mentored you and who kind of believed in you and got you to believe in you, and I really like that, because it kind of talks to the subject of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's a message there of, if someone else around you, who in this case has more experience, says, hey, I see you doing A or B, or
Mhm.
this role or that role, and your imposter syndrome says, no, sorry, it's not for you, you're too green, whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's a message there, right, of trust this person, uh,
Mhm.
and and dip your toe in the pool and allow yourself to try.
Yeah.
It feels like it's what you did.
Yeah, I've done it. There's, there was that time, and then another time, my sort of first entry point into working with CBC. I remember, there was this great manager, Linda Shorten, who thought I think she could be a great producer. And I remember going home thinking, I'm not a producer. I'm like, I don't know what they do. And I don't, and I mean, how silly would it have been if I said, no, that's not, I can't do that. And
Well, people do that. People do that
no,
every day.
I know. And I know why people do it. I know why people do it. I really didn't have much to lose because I didn't have anything else going on. And it was a great opportunity. Um, but yeah, I think a big part of this for people who leave with PhDs and don't know how to find their path in the job market, for me, a big part of it has been connecting and being lucky enough to find those people who will believe in you and see that you do have something to offer. Very often there are people who have also come with PhDs and have found their path, and it's sort of like I know what it's like, come under my wing, I'm going to help you.
Hmm.
It's not always, so for these two women I mentioned, they saw something in me and they encouraged me, and that's luck. Like, that's part of it, is just you just need someone to give you a break
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
often. And I don't know about everyone, but I know for me, when I left graduate school, it was tough. Like, I didn't know. You have an I had you I think a lot of people, you have an identity crisis. I've been a
Oh yeah,
student for so long. Who am I now? What am I? If you don't have a path, you really don't know.
yeah.
So
I'm
I
not going to
didn't
be teaching
I'm not going to be
all of these.
teaching. I'm not, and I don't, you're not always in a great place where you can believe in yourself and have that confidence. So
Hmm.
to those gracious people who see it in you, and I think most people meet them. I think they're out there for everyone.
Hmm. No, and you do come out of the graduate school experience, especially the PhD, with with a specific, let's say, flavor of creativity, and of language, and of there's a formatting to how you think and how you structure your ideas. There's a stamina, an endurance too. I feel that
Yeah.
people come with, which is not a given for everyone. And you also mentioned it, an ability of an ability to learn on the go,
Yeah.
about something that you didn't know about yesterday, but someone asks you to go now study it, and you can kind of quickly make yourself, not a specialist, but someone who now has a good modicum of knowledge about this domain, which
Hmm.
in the domains that you worked is, is key and is part and parcel of the day to day, I feel. But not only, if you go into
Hmm.
industry, you're from the life sciences like me, you go into industry, you go into the government, into policy, whatever. These types of skills are very transferable.
Hmm.
But I agree that there's an identity crisis. There's some sadness at the end,
Yeah.
of that journey. But we're here to tell people that that feeling is because you're kind of leaving this tribe
Yeah.
for which you had kind of prepared yourself years and years to go into. But the good news is there's a bunch of people and organizations and corporations and government, etc., out there, structures that are really eager to have people like you with the skills, of a PhD, the transferable skills of a PhD,
Hmm.
that need these people in them. And well, this
Hmm.
to more and more people are going and trying to solve these issues that we have today, be it climate, be it social unrest and migration. And there's, more and more problems get more and more complex. So
Hmm.
having a research background and a research mindset is going to be useful in different walks of life, I'd say.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think those those feelings are totally normal. Like, of course, you're going to feel frustrated, angry, grief, grieving. That's just totally normal. And so I think understanding that for a lot of people, that's part of the process. I didn't know that at the time, but now I see lots of other people I've known go through it. And it's like, of course, how could it be any different? I'd been a student for my whole life and now I wasn't anymore, had no
Yeah.
attachment to a university. It was a big change.
Yeah, and this kind of shows how the PhD is in a way a solitary endeavor, because I went through the same. I thought that the difficulties I had at the end of the PhD were something just particular to me, were my fault, whatever. And then
Yeah.
years went by, and like you, I was like, oh no, the students I'm talking with now who are who are in this career fair are going through the exact same questioning and the exact same pain that I was. So I think
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's important to talk about it and to normalize it. Now,
Yeah.
one thing we didn't talk about is
Yeah.
your, because you had this internship which was around the middle of your PhD, or because
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
was the temporality, and how did you go from that to then finishing, to then adjuncting, like you said, but then kind of accepting that, okay, this is not the path that I want to follow.
Um, so yeah, I did the internship, I think for 2 years, and then
Oh wow,
for
okay.
the last year, I thought, okay, I'm going to focus on wrapping up the dissertation. Um, and then they got another graduate student in to do it. I think we got 2 applications when I left. And uh, so then I focused on just finishing because I knew I just wanted to finish the dissertation. Um, and then I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, I'll just adjunct I
Hmm. Hmm.
taught a class. I had applied for an internship at the Walrus, which is a sort of current affairs magazine here in Canada. And I didn't get it. But another person sort of thinking this person has potential, the woman who's now the senior editor said, we're not going to give it to you, but I think you should write for us.
Oh wow.
So I started sort of working on pieces with her. I was adjuncting. And I think actually like one moment, so I graduated in May 2017, or I defended in May 2017. And then the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville was August 2017.
Okay.
And the woman, Heather Heyer, who was killed, that was just a couple blocks from where I was living at the time. And that was sort of a pretty transformative moment for me in terms of realizing how much I already knew this, but it really cemented it, how much the historical context matters for all of these crises that were, you mentioned a handful of them.
Hmm.
Because, the issue was about this statue of Robert E. Lee, when the Confederate generals, and if it was going to get taken down. And, there's a lot of misconceptions about when the statue was created and why, and all of these things. And so it really, I guess, made me see that there was a bigger purpose to sort of applying history to journalistic practices and journalistic stories. So then I left adjuncting because I just thought like it was just sort of putting salt in the wound of me still being
Yeah.
and I didn't know what to do, and I just sent out emails and networked, and through cold call emails I got a path into the CBC and happened to meet that woman, Linda Shorten, at a time when she needed people on the show Tapestry. And
Hmm.
I was there sort of in a freelance, temporary, like, casual basis, but for about a year. And that's where I really learned a lot of the role of being a producer, because before then, a lot of the work I had done with backstory was the research behind the scenes,
Yeah.
helping providing the producers with research.
With
Now I
material.
was the producer. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that was
Do you
part of the
remember?
identity crisis.
Yeah. No, and I think reinventing yourself is part of the game afterwards. I think you did something right, which was keep cold emailing and reaching out to people.
Mhm.
It's still, it works. Of course,
Yeah.
the fact that you had these 2 years experience must have counted. Uh,
Mhm.
must must on the scale for people you were reaching out to. So
Mhm.
there's that. How can I say? If you finish your PhD, you just did your PhD research, and then you try reinventing yourself on the fly and try to land a position. Uh,
Mhm.
it can happen depending on who you talk to, who you meet, and the things that you bring from before even graduate school. But this internship, I'm sure, was really instrumental in people opening that first opening up your email and going through it with interest, and then opening that door to you working freelance and
Mhm.
eventually work in a more in a
Mhm.
different capacity. The other thing that I like is that it seems that you kind of learned on the job. Do you remember the first position, that freelance position, the name of the, or what, how they were, excuse me, what was the job title, and then what it became once
At
you,
which one?
you the CBC.
Oh, that was associate producer.
Okay, associate
Yeah,
producer.
so I was associate producer, and yeah, and that's like this is I think also I didn't even know what the job of a producer was. I remember I was working and I loved it and I said to my colleague like I can't believe this is a job, you know? Um so you don't know what exists as well,
Mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm. Of
Yeah.
course. And that's why I always try to get people to, at least from year 2, 3 of their PhD, in countries like ours where it can go to 4,
Mhm.
5, 6, by the middle of the PhD, that they start widening their horizons and seeing what's out there. Because if you start at 3 months before you defend, it's too late to learn what's out there, what jobs are people
Yeah.
getting, what's the lingo, what's the culture, etc. It's too short an amount of time. But what's interesting about what you said, and that's why I asked about the job title, is that
Yeah.
you got a job title that you didn't really know what it was, and that you learned
Yeah.
on the go, probably
Yeah.
shadowed someone, you were
Yeah.
mentored. And often people, especially people who are given to overthinking, and I know that women do it more than men,
Mhm.
when a job description, when you don't feel all the check boxes,
Mm.
or at least the majority of them, you don't apply. And
Yeah.
here is Melissa going into a position with a name that she really didn't know exactly what it meant, but someone
Yeah.
told her, hey, come and work for us, we think this is going to be cool for you. And you took that leap of faith. You believed in
Mhm.
yourself, you also believed in what the other person was kind of
Mhm.
envisioning for you. And ta-da, you actually became that. You and you made it your job. I think it's there's a great lesson there of not taking job postings face value. And it's something that when we come from academia, well, we don't know. It's a culture we haven't been in, so we're very Cartesian. We look at something, oh no, I'm missing, I don't know, 50% of my data, I can't publish this article,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's more flexible than that, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I was applying to CBC. I thought, okay, well, where would be cool places to work? So I was applying to CBC jobs. They were predominantly assistant type jobs. Because I just thought I'm just going to throw this and see where it goes. Um, had I seen an associate producer job, I would not have applied to it precisely for what you're saying. In my case, and this is there's a lot to say about what's bad about the precarious nature of work for a lot of people these days. The one good thing is I didn't have to apply. I was sort of hired on like a day, come in tomorrow, we'll see how it goes. And then
Hmm.
tomorrow became a week and then a month. And this will often happen, I think, with people. And then maybe down the road, you got to actually apply. But
Yeah.
um, they're trying you out. but you also get to try them out
Yeah.
and see if it works for you, if you like it. And
Hmm.
again, there's a lot that's bad about it, but that's one thing that's good.
Definitely, definitely. Melissa, we're getting to the end of the interview, and but I still have one or two things to that I'd like to ask you.
Hmm.
Um, it because we're looking back, like I was saying, hindsight is 2020. We can kind of make sense and put everything, this goes here, this goes there. But I think we've been also frank, you especially, in the fact that there was serendipity, there was luck involved to a certain sense. You were doing legwork, but
Yeah.
there was a human factor of interacting with people who got to know you and who kind of opened the door for you, or actually kind of made you aware of possibilities and kind of offered you a chance to
Hmm.
try something out. And it people who are finishing, let's say, a PhD might feel, well, it's unfair that after all of this work I still have to face uncertainty or
Yeah.
be reliant on luck to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not all luck, but I'd really like to spend a few minutes as we end this conversation on this, because I think people can be afraid of this and may
Hmm.
not take the leap because of the uncertainty.
Hmm.
People can have negative feelings about it, but I think it's somehow it's an aspect of human life, but we need to accept it. And I don't know where
Hmm.
I'm going, but I kind of I'd love to hear what you, looking back, uh, what's your reflection on it, and what lesson we can take, and what's kind of an actionable piece of advice that we can give
Hmm.
people listening.
Yeah. I guess the first thing I'd say is it is unfair. And it does, it is unfair. And I get those feelings. You work really hard in a PhD, and the reality is, for most of us, that's not going to be rewarded in like a traditional sense. In terms, my salary never has reflected my education level or anything like that in other contexts where it might, you know um so it is totally fair. um I think the thing with luck is it's like that phrase of sort of how you have to, there's luck, but then you also have to be able and willing to meet the opportunity. So for instance, if I hadn't applied to that internship, my connection into the CBC, if I hadn't emailed the woman who happened to be the executive producer of a show, I'd actually emailed her before to complain about something, not on the show, but just sort of the lack of women participating in the monk debates, which were something they were airing. And she'd
Hmm.
responded to me. And so when I emailed her a year later, or 2 years later, I said, you probably don't remember this, but if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have, it's all of those little things. And you don't have a plan. I mean, you have mini plans. You have the plan you're going to take that day, and you
Hmm.
can't know where it's going to go 5 or 10 years down the road. I think that's tricky for PhD people because in the world of academia, it's rigid and it goes assistant professor, associate. We know the levels and we know how it
Yeah.
goes. And that's not the case in the majority of the world. so,
Hmm.
um, so in terms of action items, you know, someone gave me this advice. It's sort of lean towards what excites you and lean towards where opportunities are showing up. So for
Hmm.
me, I was getting nowhere with academic anything. Even if I was, oh, there's a job at the University of Toronto, how cool would that be? I'll apply. I wasn't getting nowhere. But then someone at the Walrus wanted me to write for them. So I thought, all right, I'm going to lean. This is kind of exciting because it's scary and it's unknown. And this opportunity is being someone's giving it to me, so I'm going to lean into that. Now, I wouldn't do that for something that felt just totally wrong for me, that you're every sort of cell in your body screaming, no, don't do it.
Hmm.
But it will be scary. So, try to determine, okay, what's scary because this is new and unfamiliar versus scary because it's just not right for me and I don't want to do it. And sometimes I think
Hmm.
people know staying in academia isn't right for them, but you do it anyways because you try to do it anyways because it's the familiar path and you know
Hmm.
how it's going to go. And the other
Hmm.
path, you have no idea. But it's sort of more exciting and it can lead to more interesting places sometimes.
Definitely, definitely, Melissa. I think it's a great message to kind of start wrapping up the episode. I just kind of want to do a kind of a to sum up myself what I'm distilling from this almost hour
Mm-hmm.
that we've been together. And if let's see if I can do it in the order that we went through it. But the first big takeaway for me is, if there is something within you, a passion for something, an interest for something, don't let it go or don't ignore it while you're in graduate school. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, your graduate work is going to be taking a lot of your time, a lot of your mind, a lot of your bandwidth. But from your story, Melissa, I feel that small, tiny, you know, things that you do day by day to keep an interest, to feed an interest that you have, a passion that you have, can pay a lot of dividends later on. That's
Mm-hmm.
one message, and they can be small things. Of course, well, doing an internship is not a small thing per se. It was a big chunk of your week that was dedicated to that, but you were towards the
Mm-hmm.
end of your PhD. You had talked with your supervisor. It was
Mm-hmm.
fine, but you had this curiosity and this will to try it, and you could have decided, oh no, it's too much of a commitment. It would have
Yeah.
been very easy in an alternate universe that you would have seen it and you would have said, yeah, sorry, I'm doing a PhD. It's I want to
Yeah.
finish it. It's not for me. So there's this thing about so feeding or nurturing something in you and not letting it die because you're in a PhD. That's one. Two, take a leap of faith of experimenting something different if an opportunity arises, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
happened with this internship that you had. Two, believe with someone in another when someone in another space says, oh, you know what, you do well in this space. But I know you're in another space, but hey, I'm just letting you know, it'd be great to have you as a colleague. Believe them, or don't
Yeah.
um, dis- disregard or devalue what they're saying because your imposter syndrome is telling, oh no, you're going to be a professor and you're an academic. This is not for you. And maybe a last one, because I know this is a lot of little points, but I
Mm-hmm.
think they're really nice nuggets
Mm-hmm.
that we had
Yeah.
along the
Yeah.
way. um a final one is, it kind of ties up with the first one because it's little things, but it's little actions. You kept on writing. You wrote this email to this person at CBC saying, hey, there should be more women represented in this show. It
Yeah.
sounds very, unrelated, but for sure, because you mentioned it somehow, that it means that there's a link there. For sure the person remembered, or
Mm-hmm.
could have gone back and said, oh yeah, I did get an email from you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were already someone in her mind when that second email arrived, and you
Mm-hmm.
weren't just a new person trying to get her attention. And there was a there I think the point there, it's a point that and I'm going to finish here with, because I think it's already a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And it's also where we ended with what you shared. But nurturing connections, real connections, because when you wrote her the first time, it was because there was something that was important to you, that you needed to share with her about this content.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any second hidden interests or whatever. You were just
No. Yeah.
connecting with the person and saying, hey, I'm a listener. I'd like to have this improved. And what I often say is, ideally, if you want to have a healthy transition outside of academia, you should start building relationships, a wider network earlier on, since like the
Hmm.
middle of your PhD at least. And it's because if you start building your network and your mindset is already, can you please get me a job, it's you're gonna fail.
Yeah.
If you ask someone, hey, by the way, if there's a job, but someone you already know from
Yeah.
6 months, from a year ago, and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to be finishing my PhD in a few months, if you hear about something, I'm interested, in working in your domain. Totally different conversation. And I
Hmm.
think there's a parallel with what happened with you. And I really think your story encapsulates a lot of great nuggets, and I hope people who listen will be able to savor them, and to take some notes, and to be able to kind of avoid the mistakes, avoid the pitfalls, and use the good ideas that you shared, Melissa.
Hopefully. Yeah.
If people want to kind of thank you or just ask you something more, of course, here you have a website,
Hmm.
melissajgismonti.com.
Hmm.
But is there another way that or a better way for people to reach out and maybe comment on what they heard on the episode?
They can go to my website. I have an email address there. They can email me. I respond to almost every respectful email I get. Some are not so respectful, but I know your listeners are just, they would never do anything like that. Um, on LinkedIn, I'm on Substack. I just started a new Substack newsletter.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's paying it forward. There are great people who helped me, and so if I can help people and, provide some guidance or just be a space to offer some encouragement, happy to do that.
Mhm. Awesome. uh, as I always say to people who are watching or listening, you can hear how the people who are on the show are nice. People who are on LinkedIn are open to be reached out to. So if you're a little bit more shy, more timid, don't hesitate to. And but if you have something to ask of Melissa, some more
Hmm.
details or just a feedback on the story, just reach out. Don't
Hmm.
hesitate.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you have something that hasn't been covered on the show that you like to be covered, just you can write to ideas@papaphd.com. I'm always looking for new ideas, even ideas of guests. So don't hesitate to do that too. And yeah, I just want to thank you for being with us. Hope you have some nice take home messages. And the last thing is, if there's someone around you who's doing the PhD and who would benefit from hearing Melissa's story, don't hesitate to share this episode with them. Melissa knows it. It's one of the best things you can do to help a podcast is to share it with someone you know.
Yeah.
So, Melissa, thank you so much for being on Beyond the
Thank
Thesis.
you.
This was a great conversation, and thanks to everyone who was watching and who was listening. And that's it for the recording. Thank you,
Great.
Melissa. We're still
Yeah.
live,
Okay.
um, but it went great. I really enjoyed it. I think uh, uh, the way there were so many elements that I wanted to be sure to to reinforce at the end. Maybe it was
Yeah.
a little bit too much. I should have chosen three maybe. But a lot of great nuggets in your story. Thanks so much for coming in and
Yeah,
sharing
no,
your story.
happy to. It was fun. And I love how you sort of write it up, like you write takeaways for people. And I think that's like they
Mhm.
can listen and then when they see it, it'll, sort of it can reinforce it in
It'll
people.
reinforce exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll pull up my file right now and send